Mike, we'll wait for you to get settled and we'll get rocking.
Jake, why don't you do the general intro to No Sunday Scaries, and then I'll take her from there.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Mike, good evening. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you.
Hope, our special guest. Hope, good to see you. We'll come back to you and do a formal intro in just a sec. Good to see you there. Thanks for joining us. So it is Sunday night. It's gorgeous. I hope wherever you are, it is fantastic right now in Colorado. It's, I don't know, about 70 degrees. The sun's in that perfect point in the sky. It's wine o'clock. It's time to get down. In fact, I know we talked about this a couple weeks ago, just having like an official drink, and actually maybe Hope can help us create one. But wanted to welcome everyone to another episode of the No Sunday Scaries Club. For those joining us live, welcome. We're so glad you're here. For those who didn't know this, you can join us live. Just go over to www.nosundayscaries.club and you can sign up for free to join our live interviews. So on a Sunday night, you can pop open Zoom with your family and end your night with a live interview with a fascinating human, and actually get a chance to ask your own questions too. And this whole club started because we recognized that for some, on Sunday nights, as the sun starts to set, different emotions start to arise within us. Sometimes it's excitement. Sometimes it may actually be some anxiety. Sometimes it may be some fear or worry about the work week ahead. And we wanted to insert something that would break the pattern on a Sunday night, just put us in front of fascinating and inspirational people that are doing amazing things, in the hopes that our brains just we don't just slip into that slump on the couch and watch Netflix all night. We actually use our brain and think about what we can do to move our lives and our businesses forward. And we're grateful to be joined by a special guest tonight, which Mike, I'll let you introduce in a moment. But as we always do, Mike, we'd love to kind of center ourselves before we get going and think about some of the lessons we learned. So I urge everyone, whether you're listening now on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, or watching on YouTube, take a moment, just think about some of the lessons you've learned in the past couple of days. And Mike, I'm curious, coming off your huge first delve into ultra marathoning, now you're an endurance athlete officially. I'm sure you had an amazing week to reflect upon what you accomplished, but I'm curious, what lessons you want to share with the club tonight.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah. And for me, it's recovery. That's my word. I came off a long run, longer than I've ever run before, distance wise. And you got to give your body time to recover. And I'm a week out from running 50 kilometers, 31 miles, and still not at the point where I want to get back on the road. Although I'm jonesing. I'm seeing people run down the street, on their jogs, and maybe they're running 31 miles, and I'm jealous. But giving myself time or giving my body time to rest and make sure that I'm okay for the next time that I go out. Because at this point, you do 31 miles, you do 50 kilometers, and there's no going back, right? You just want to do more and more and more. So you have to make sure that, or at least for me, that I'm giving my body enough time to recover. And that's not easy because, there is that aspect of just like wanting to get right back out and do it again. So I'm just thinking about recovery and the mindset around stretching out, lengthening myself, doing some strength training, and making sure that, my body is to the point where I can take another longer race. So recovery is my thought for the week.
Yeah, similar for me. I had one of those an atypical week where I was traveling the whole week, and it was one of those like breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything's planned, very little time to myself, which for me is a little different because I work from home, and generally it's the opposite. So same mindset coming home. Recovery. I slept on the plane, which is not something I normally do. That's how I knew how exhausted I was, and made the choice not to work on the flight home and just recover. And even the next day, took it easy, because it's a different type of recovery for me. That amount of socialization is not normal for me, and my body needs actually some time to recover. It took me all weekend almost to get caught up on sleep and kind of de-stress from it. So I'm with you there. I think it sounds like we're both just listening to our bodies and doing what it needed. So I
Nice.
like that.
Hope, before we give you the big intro, Hope, can we get a lesson of the week from you?
Oh, you're muted. Oh no. Hope you're on mute.
I don't know how that happened, but
There we go.
a lesson. I wasn't prepared for a lesson, but
It's okay.
I think probably not to bring the mood down, but I think after the events of yesterday, I think the lesson is to just to let the people in your lives know how much you care about them and keep in touch, and live the moments. Do what you want to do and don't wait. And yeah, love your people. Hug them.
And Hope, I don't want to skip over too much of the bio, but all of the things that you've done. You started your first business at 19 years old. You have created Crave Philly, which is a video series that you've collaborated with Billy Penn on for those of us in Philadelphia under the umbrella of WHYY, which goes back
Public television.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Public television, which goes back years and years for me growing up. But you split your time now between Philadelphia and Rome. You have published many books, specifically.
No, I've only published one. One book.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Published one book.
Okay.
And you're CEO of Strawberry Blonde, a culinary. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. That's sort of the umbrella over my companies. I don't really use that. Like, people don't know me as that. It's really just the umbrella for my different businesses. People know me as Hope Cohen, as a chef, and Crave Philly is what I'm focusing on now. Fast, Fresh, and Simple is the name of the book, and I produced a series of cooking shows of episodes when I came out with this book, and those shows broadcast on the Comcast network, formerly known as CN8.
And so, you're traveling a lot, and you are, talking to a lot of different people around the world and locally. So, what you mentioned obviously is top of mind for everybody. What do you think is, as far as just day-to-day life, there is the aspect of just getting up every day and going to work, and what we deal with here, and trying to make Sundays or whatever day that you have to go back to work for the week, making it something that we want to be enthusiastic around. How do you put yourself in the position where you're just energetic and approaching that the clear mind?
Well, for me, it all goes back to the kitchen, because that's sort of my Zen space. So if I'm trying to prepare for something, whether it's a Sunday or any day of the week, I'll get into the kitchen, and it works perfectly for Sunday for people who might be anxious or have stuff coming up, or just trying to organize themselves for the week. Preparation is always a great way to manage stress and anxiety and busy schedules. And for me, coming into the kitchen and, cooking is my happy place and my Zen. So yeah, I like to plan for my week. This week, I have a crazy week coming up. I'm filming episodes of Crave Philly, traveling to Detroit to go visit my son because he lives on the West Coast. It's like an easier place to meet rather than LA. And so I've got a lot of stuff going on, but I also want to make sure that I have food in the house. And so trying to think of when I'm going to be home, when I'm going to be eating, and doing some meal prep maybe, or planning out, what my schedule is going to be like. And also, Sunday nights often I like to be at home and cook.
Yeah.
Just feels good. And it gives me time to think about, myself, catch up with family members, watch the news, whatever, 60 minutes. But it's just sort of like a quiet, I like Sundays for me as a sort of quiet space.
I love that, Hope. And so can you take us back? Because as I understand it, you started cooking when you were what, 5? Is this when the
Yeah.
passion was
I
created?
mean, I was really young. I always tell people my mother bought me an easy bake oven,
Oh my
and that
gosh,
was the beginning of the end. I just was
making brownies.
obsessed with that thing.
Yeah.
And I learned to love to cook.
Yeah. So tell us about that. So growing up, what was the culinary influence around you? Because now, for those that don't know, I mean, you've worked with the best of the best, the Iron Chefs of the world, you know, the Morimotos, the George Perrier, all over the place. So what was the influence like for you growing up?
Yeah, actually, Jose Andres, who's incredible, is just blown up as a star, did
Yeah.
his first cooking show with me before he had ever done any TV. He was so nervous, and now he's, like probably going to win a Nobel Peace Prize.
Seriously. Wow.
But I grew up in a household. My mom was a single mom, divorced, but she had 3 girls, and she worked several jobs to make ends meet. But she loved to cook, and she wasn't an amazing cook, but she was a good cook. And so I learned some things from her. And my grandmother, her mother, would come to our house several times a week, and every Sunday she would come and cook, and we would all eat together as a family. So no matter what was going on, we were all busy, 3 kids, different ages, my mom working, but we always came together at the table. And so that was an early lesson for me, and something that I've also instilled in my own kids. Being at the table is how you put your finger on the pulse of what's going on with other people in your life. And so that was always something really important to me. But my grandmother was a typical Jewish grandmother, but somehow I think both my mother and my grandmother had some Italian friends in the periphery, because there was always a lot of Italian food happening, even though my grandmother was like a great Jewish grandmother cook. So it was either, traditional sort of foods that my grandmother had certain dishes that she would make, but also pasta and spaghetti were huge for us on Sundays. Very often, my mom would make a big pot of spaghetti sauce with, meatballs and pork and, garlic bread and spaghetti. So there was always a lot of food growing up.
And so at what point did it click to you that like this was something you wanted to do professionally? Walk us through that.
That didn't really happen for a long time. I mean, I knew that I loved cooking, and I would cook a lot for my family. Even when I was 9 years old, I was playing around in the kitchen, and I was very intrigued by cooking. And at that time, there were no cooking shows on TV except maybe, like the Galloping Gourmet or some stupid, that was a terrible show, or Julia Child, who I didn't really watch at that time. But I knew that I liked food and I liked cooking. I think my love of cooking partially came from my love of eating. I always just loved the taste of food. I didn't travel much at that young age. So I don't know. I just think it was in my veins. But I didn't realize that it was something that I really wanted to do until I think after my kids were born. I mean, I worked in restaurants starting at even 17 years old. I was working in a restaurant, but it was always in the front of the house. So I was always serving or working as a bartender. I did every job in restaurants, but didn't really start working in restaurant kitchens until after my kids were born. And I got a little bit bored with the idea of staying at home as a mom. And so there was a series of events that happened, and I wound up being in kitchens, and I realized that that's what I really love to do.
So, yeah, walk us through. So, I'll ask the obvious question here. So, how do you go from being passionate about something, studying it, to then not only writing your own cookbooks, but also being in front of the camera, interviewing the best of the best around the world? What advice would you have for someone that wants to do that too? How does that happen? And what advice would you have for someone that wants that to experience the same thing?
It's probably a long answer to a shorter question, but I would say number one is to follow your passion. Obviously, that's I often am asked to speak to kids. I've lectured at Penn and talked to people about food and culture. And I always tell people I didn't go to college. That was not the path for me. I think that education is incredibly important, but it just wasn't the method, how I learned in the best way that I could. So I followed my passion. I did what felt good, what I loved to do. And I think that life, and I didn't make this up, I'm sure you've heard it before, but life is a combination of magic and pasta. That's kind of like what happened with me. I think that being in the right place or at the right time, talking to the right people goes a long way, but then you get opportunities and it's what do you do with them? I just worked hard. I did what I love to do, and I conducted myself in a way that I also tell my kids to do. And I always just sort of treated people respectfully. And fortunately, things happened and doors opened for me. And I was, a bit of a hustler as a kid. Like, I wanted to work and earn money. We didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. And so I knew that if I wanted to have spending money, I would have to work. And I just was doing all kinds of jobs. And so, yeah, I started working in restaurants in my late teens. I started a catering business when I was 18 from my home kitchen, which I just started promoting myself, and people, I don't know, they tasted my food, they liked it. At that time, they offered to give me a job like catering small parties, and I started doing that. I got super busy, but I realized that if it was going to be a real business, that I would have to either scale up or stop. And I decided I didn't really want to work that hard at being in the catering business. So I started working in restaurants again. And then there was a period of time where I got out of the restaurant business because I didn't think it was a serious business, because at that time, chefs weren't rock stars and people thought the restaurant business was for losers, like people, cooks who worked in the kitchen.
When was that?
I mean, that was probably like in the mid 80s, like right before the restaurant thing started to be a thing. If you worked in a restaurant, you were pretty much a loser. People that worked in restaurants weren't educated, didn't go to school. It was kind of like what you did when you couldn't make it doing other stuff.
Right. Before diners, drive-ins, and dives. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
what were you doing in the restaurant business at that point?
I was everything from I started bussing tables when I was young. I was a server, I was a bartender, I was a hostess. I did everything. I helped manage friends' restaurants. I did everything front of the house, but not working in the kitchen. But at home, always loving food and cooking. But I never really thought about being a chef because, first of all, girls didn't do that. Women, it wasn't at that time. Women chefs really didn't exist very much, and it wasn't. It just wasn't something that entered my mind. So I actually stopped working in the restaurant business and got my real estate license because I thought that was like a more serious career. And I went and started selling real estate, and I was really good at it. I started making real money, not the kind of money you make in restaurants. And at that time in the 80s, it was so easy because all you had to do was show up in an open house and you would sell one. And so I thought I was done with food and the restaurant business and I was just going to cook at home. But then after I got married and had kids and I stopped working, and I was a stay-at-home mom for a couple of years, I got super bored. I just am not this type of person that could not work. And so I think how it all started was I had a friend who loved my food, and she said, "You're such a great cook. Will you give me cooking lessons?" And I said, "How am I going to give you cooking lessons? I don't know how to do that." So I invited her over to my house one day when my kids were at school, and I said, "Let's pretend that I'm the teacher and you're the student, and I'll write a recipe and I'll teach you how to cook pasta." And I did it. And as I was doing it, I thought, wow, I can do this. And she's like, "Wow, this is so great." And I gave her this recipe that I wrote, and she went home and made the pasta. And she's like, "This is incredible. You're such a great teacher. Like, you should do this." So after that happened, I realized, wow, this could be something for me to do while my kids are at school. I can make some money, do something that I love. So I started teaching cooking classes from my home while my kids were at school, and teaching the parents of their kids while their kids were in school. And so I would have small groups either in my kitchen at home on the main line of Philadelphia, or go to other people's houses and teach cooking. So that's how I started cooking. Hold on, my battery is low and my phone is plugged in, but my phone is not charging, and I don't want you to lose me. So hang on for 1 second. Sorry about that.
That's all good. I just think it's, we're about to get into some of the to your point, the celebrity chefs, but it's just so crazy to think about, that moment of like cooking for your friend kind of sparked maybe I could do this. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And so I was teaching cooking classes to all these people. And then one day I went to a party and I bumped into a friend who was a chef at a restaurant in Philadelphia who at that time he was cooking Nuevo Latino food. So this is probably let's say by this time it was like the early 90s, and Nuevo Latino was new. Like nobody was cooking that kind of food. There was one restaurant in New York that was run by a chef named Douglas Rodriguez, who was like combining all the food from South America and the Caribbean. And then there was this chef in Philadelphia, and his restaurant was called Vega Grill, his first restaurant. And his food was amazing, like a ton of flavor. And his restaurant was the only restaurant I could go to and taste the food and not know how to immediately recreate it when I went home. And I said, I'd like to kind of work in your kitchen a couple of days a week. Can I just come and like hang out? He's like, yeah, sure. He never thought I would show up. Well, I showed up. I started going a few days a week. And then I loved it so much. I was so intrigued by what he was doing. It started being a regular thing. And then one day someone didn't show up to work in the kitchen that night. And he said, hey, do you want to like come in and help us? Because he saw that I was, engrossed and I knew what I was doing. And I started working like one day a week in the restaurant. And that's how I started getting into restaurant kitchens. It was just by chance. I had never worked in a kitchen, although I was familiar from all my front of the house work. That introduced me to some other people in the restaurant business. And I just happened at that time I was going through a divorce, and I was involved with somebody that had a group of restaurants in Philadelphia. And I was at a dinner at one of the restaurants, and I met this TV producer who was producing this series of cooking shows, and they were recasting the role of host. And he asked me if I would come in and audition. And I said, you're crazy. I've never done any TV. I'm not a journalist. I didn't go to college. Like, how am I going to do this? He said, just come. And so sort of as a lark, I went thinking it was the most ridiculous thing. I didn't take it seriously. And when I went to audition, I jumped into the kitchen with a chef and just pretended I was, talking to him and hosting. And I guess my experience in cooking and working with chefs allowed me to be a really good liaison between the two. And I felt so natural, and the camera didn't intimidate me. And I filmed this episode, and the producer hired me on the spot, having never done that. So that's how I got started hosting cooking shows. And so it was just all happenstance.
But when did you realize, because you've taken time in the kitchen all the way up to hosting a cooking show to the next level, when did you ever think or realize that you were an entrepreneur, and did you make a conscious decision that would be what you were? Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
I do now. I think I do. I definitely not think I do. I think at that time I was just working really hard, doing what I love to do. And I felt like I had great opportunities and I ran with them. I mean, doors opened. I think I was in some respects a little bit lucky to have been introduced to the people that I was, but what I did after that is what allowed me to excel. And I don't think at the time I thought of myself as an entrepreneur at all. I thought of myself kind of the same way that people did before, as of people in the restaurant business. I kind of thought I wasn't excelling the way that some people were in life. Like I had friends that went to university and, had these big jobs and were doing important things. And I always compared myself to those people and thought, well, here I am, like, working in food and restaurants. I never really thought it was really a career until much later when I look back on all the things I accomplished. Obviously, yeah, I was an entrepreneur. I was a bit of a hustler. I worked hard and I accomplished great things just by doing what I was passionate about.
I think that's the thing, Mike, is like there's the notion of even thinking about it as a different category doesn't show up for someone that's truly aligned with what they want to do. Like, asking, can I work a couple days in the kitchen? Like, okay, sure. Why
I didn't
not?
get paid for that, by the way.
Like, okay, this lady wants to come work here for sure. Come on. Yeah. She'll never show. I mean, that's what I think it is. And that's frankly, I think why the Sunday Scaries becomes a conversation, because I think when we talk about this all the time on the show, I think there's misalignment. I think maybe some people may have this dream of maybe even doing the same thing as you, Hope, writing the cookbook and, and interviewing these famous chefs and traveling the world and trying new cuisines. I mean, is it as awesome as it sounds to do the work you're doing,
Yes.
especially filming the show? Yeah. Tell us about
I
that.
mean,
What's a day in the life like?
um, it depends where I am, but yeah, it's pretty amazing from my perspective.
Yeah.
I don't get bored. Hosting the cooking show was a dream for me because I got to work with incredibly talented chefs side by side. So it was the best experience and education anyone could hope for. Better than going to culinary school, better than, better than anything. I got to work with these talented people side by side for hundreds of hours. I filmed over 400 cooking shows with, super famous chefs. So my skills were great. And it was, for me, it was a dream. Plus I was getting paid. Plus I was on TV, which was kind of fun. So people started knowing who I was, and that promoted me and that opened other doors. So for example, after I was doing the cooking show, I met someone from QVC who had seen me hosting the cooking show, and they knew I had a cooking background and I had experience on camera. And they said, you should come to QVC and sell some kitchen products. And that in those days, QVC was blowing up and you could get a job there and go on air. And when I went to work there, I went for an audition and they liked me. And so they hired me and he said, okay, come back at this time on this day. I got no training, no instructions. They just kind of like pushed me out. And I was on live TV selling, I think, an electric knife for Black & Decker, and it sold a ton. And so I started getting jobs doing that. So I was, hosting the cooking show. I was working one night a week in the restaurant. I was selling things in the overnight hours. Sometimes I would get babysitters to come so I could be home in the morning when my kids woke up, and at 2 a.m, I'm like I sold all kinds of things at QVC. So all of this sort of
Awesome.
snowballed. So anyway, that wasn't the fun part. That was kind of the hard work part. But being in this role has opened doors in a way to experiences. When I go to a restaurant, usually people know me. I mean, anybody that comes out to eat with me knows that magically dishes appear that weren't ordered. So I get really great treatment. Getting reservations can be a little bit easier sometimes.
Ooh, that's
all the
nice.
time.
That's nice.
Yeah, so that part of it is great. And having sort of being able to have entree into the back of the house and knowing what's happening in restaurants, like, having a direct line to chefs. It's interesting and fun. And for somebody that loves food and beverage the way that I do, yeah, that's magic
And
and
you also
special.
you also do some consulting work with restaurants too, correct? So I'm curious.
I do.
Oh.
I do.
I'm curious what the next. So obviously, COVID changed restaurants to some degree. I'm curious if you think they can quote unquote change back to normal, or what's the next season of life look like for the restaurants that we enjoy, and I guess maybe how
Yeah.
can what can we do to support? It might seem like an obvious question, but I'd like to ask it, like, what does the next season of life look like for restaurants?
I'm not consulting as much with restaurants now as I have in the past. I work more with food brands and recipe development, but I obviously am connected to the restaurant community. And I think, it's a real struggle post-pandemic for a lot of reasons. Staffing is a huge issue. Restaurants can't get people to come to work. And then, getting product prices, it's a real struggle. I think that restaurants are bouncing back slowly. I think that this, having these streeteries and outdoor eateries has been an upside of the downside for restaurants. They've been able to increase their floor plan and increase the size of their restaurants, which can be good for business. But then again, you have to increase your staff. So it's a double-edged sword. I think that just, continue to go out to eat and support the restaurants and have a little bit more patience. Although even for me, that can be difficult when you're going out and you're paying and sometimes a higher price. You want great service, but to just not just restaurants, but treating the world generally a little bit kinder and having some patience, I think goes a long way. I hope that restaurants will come back. I hope that the economy will grow and people will bounce back. I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
Hope, you touched on something that is close to me. I did not go to college either. And I always, I wouldn't say I struggled, but I always think about how I would talk about not going to college as a benefit for me personally, and I think for you as well with your success, finding other ways to make your way in the world. And there's a lot of fear around that. There's a lot of trepidation because that's not what society generally will tell you is the right way to go.
It's not always the easiest path.
Right. So what would you say to someone who's in that position now, considering their options coming out of high school, or, what would you say to someone like that?
I mean, I say this whenever I'm speaking to a group of kids. I've mentored kids in the past. I think that it's really important to pay attention to what works for you. I think college is important. Education is important, but there are other ways to get an education. I mean, college is one route, and it's a great route. And, I'm all about secondary education. My kids both have advanced degrees and they've got great careers, and that worked for them. But if you can pay attention to how you learn and who you are as a person, and you realize that doesn't feel like the right path, but you maybe have an interest in something else, then go for it. Don't have fear. Do what you love. Pay attention to your passion and just work hard. And, I think that doors will open, and there are other ways to gain education other than going to classes in the university. So it's not the easiest path, but it can work. Obviously, it's worked for you. It's worked for me. We're not the only people. We're not unique in this world. And I think it's becoming easier now. I think I just saw something on CBS morning show this morning talking about how there are other routes in the world other than college. And so yeah, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I think it's important to pay attention to who you are as a person and how you learn.
Yeah,
how you can be educated.
I feel like the hospitality industry in general is a great chance to learn multiple skills simultaneously that will serve you regardless of what you decide to do in the future. And Hope, I want to circle back to what you mentioned about, your Sunday nights and how you use cooking to kind of zen as kind of a zen moment for you. I feel very much the same way. One of the classes that changed my life was a chopping class where I learned how to chop and do all different types of chops. And my wife gave it to me for my birthday. And so now for me, I love cooking because it gives me a defined beginning and an end to a process too, which I don't always experience in my life. So I appreciate that too. And I think for those who are sitting here on the call thinking, well, maybe that's something I could pick up too. I mean, obviously your cookbook, Fast, Fresh, and Simple, was launched 9 years ago. Is that true?
Yeah, I can't believe it.
Can you maybe like where would you suggest we start if we're just diving in and want to learn how to cook? Like how would you suggest we start? What should we be reading? Is your book a good one to pick up? And how should we start?
My book is I give my book to like people who are just getting married and people who are just starting cooking. A lot of kids. My son cooked through this book when he was in college. He loved to cook. The recipes are just what the title says: fast, fresh, and simple, but super flavor forward. Healthy recipes. Not a lot of steps involved. I've got everything from cocktails to desserts. It is a great book. But reading is one way to learn about cooking if you're interested. But the other thing is with online content these days.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people don't pick up books, but there are videos everywhere. TikTok. My daughter lives in New York and she cooks for herself, and she gets all of her recipe inspiration these days on TikTok. She's just constantly looking at recipes. And not only does it give you the recipe, but it shows you exactly what to do. Yeah. So I think that's a great tool, personally. Instagram. I mean, I'm on Instagram all the time. I mean, social media is huge for my business, but there's so many great ideas for recipes and step by step. And again, you've got video and photographs. So that's a great way to learn.
So yeah, and by the way, your Instagram is I Crave Philly. For those listening, go dial that up now, make the connection. So I have to ask this question. It may be cheesy, but I gotta know. So you've interviewed, like I said, all the famous chefs on the planet, essentially.
I mean, not all,
but a lot. The list is really strong.
Several.
Yes. If you're hosting a dinner party at your house and you could invite one to come cook for everyone, which one would you choose and why?
Oh my gosh. That's a really good question.
And no offense
It
to the
would,
others
oh
who
my,
she did not pick.
it would, oh my God, I just left out my window and the moon. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. There's this huge moon outside. It's incredible. So it would depend on what I'm in the mood to eat that night. But one of the people who I had on the cooking show once or twice who just blew me away was Morimoto, the Iron Chef, the Japanese Iron Chef. First of all, his knife skills, speaking of chopping, I mean, his knife skills were legendary. He came on the set with this huge Japanese knife and he did something. He took a daikon radish, which is like this long white radish that looks like a huge carrot.
Mm-hmm.
And he took the daikon in one hand and he took the Japanese knife in the other hand. And he like twirled the radish in a way against the knife. It happened so quickly. I don't even know what he did. And a few seconds later, he had a square of the radish. He had cut it into a paper thin piece of paper,
Wow.
this round radish. And I was just like, what just happened here? And I was literally speechless. And I had this IFB in my ear, and that's how the producer of the show would talk to me while I was filming. And he said, Hope, say something. And I was just like, what just happened here? So the answer to the question is that if I was in the mood for Japanese that night, which I often am, it might be Morimoto, because he was so incredible to watch and so talented with the knife. And his food, I love Japanese food for a lot of reasons, the flavors and just the clean simplicity of the food. And when you're working with stellar ingredients, I just love it. So he would be someone that I would love to have in my kitchen. The conversation at the table might be another story because he didn't speak English that well.
That'd be tricky.
But I'd like to work in the kitchen with him again.
Hope, do you find, oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Do you find yourself using any specific ingredient nowadays more than others? Would you, is there one ingredient that you say like, I got to use this, or I'm using this in most of my dishes?
Because I spend a lot of time in Italy, I'm an extra virgin olive oil is probably the one ingredient that I'm reaching for more than anything else.
Can you talk about that more? Because I think like as a fat, oil is being replaced by or with a lot of things. So can you speak to that from a cooking perspective, why oil is so important and why we can be using it?
I mean, look, olive oil comes from a vegetable. I'm not a scientist, but it's a healthy unsaturated fat. It's naturally derived. I mean, people in Italy have been eating diets that are rich in olive oil for hundreds of years. And people in Sardinia are some of the people that live the longest on the planet. And olive oil is a huge part of their diet. And the Mediterranean diet in general just makes sense to me. And it's the way that I eat and the way that I like to eat. I mean, vegetables come first. When I'm in Italy, often in restaurants, when we order a first course, I'll order a plate of greens like broccoli or chicory. They call it ripassata, and they cook it with olive oil and garlic. And that we'll have that. My friends and I will order that first, and you'll eat a plate of greens or whatever vegetable you're having. You'll eat that first, and then you get your meat or your pasta. So how you structure your diet is really important. And I don't think it's a surprise, that we want to try and eat less meats and more vegetables, more fish, grains. So olive oil plays a huge part in how I cook. And I think that it's super healthy and you can basically use it for everything. I mean, you can bake with it, sweet, savory dishes. It tastes great. I finish things with olive oil. I basically just swim in olive oil.
Well, I'm a half chef kind of guy who got into it during COVID. And I mean, I guess we've talked to a professional chef now for the last 45 minutes and really haven't gotten into the ingredients perspective of how important it is or how important the food that we put into our body is and the selections that we make. So, Hope, you have obviously a very good perspective on this. And I'd like to know, outside of olive oil, what you would recommend to our listeners as far as, I mean, look, I know you're not giving dietary advice here, but, what is right now something, what can we be doing to keep ourselves healthy, just very generally speaking?
So one of the recipes in my cookbook is called Ella's chopped salad. My daughter's name is Ella. And when she was in high school, she loved salads. And so the recipe that I developed was based on her love of salads. And so what I would do is I would just chop up a ton of vegetables, celery, carrots, tomatoes. She fortunately loved vegetables. So any kind of vegetable that I have in my refrigerator, I would chop up in a bowl. And then I would make a vinaigrette and I would put it in the bottom of the bowl. I'd put the vegetables on top of it. And then on top of the salad, I would take whatever protein we had left over from the night before dinner. So if I had roasted a chicken, if I had grilled a steak, if we had shrimp or scallops or pork chops, I would slice down the meat, or I would take a piece of fish, or, sometimes a can of tuna, whatever the protein was, and I would just sort of dump it on top of the vegetables. So I would have the vinaigrette in the bottom of the container. And I know I was listening to the podcast with Mike McCann that you filmed. I'm not sure when you did that, but I know him and he's great. And he talked about how his wife packs these salads for him and how a healthy lifestyle is important to him. And so this sort of plays along the same theme. But I would take that container and I would put it in her lunch, and she would put it in her backpack, and she would walk around in school for the morning. When it was time for lunch, the salad would just be mixed up, and she'd have a little bit of vinaigrette dressing with olive oil, all the vegetables and the protein. And so classic example of a super healthy meal, tastes great, how to incorporate leftovers from the dinner that you had before. It works. So that's just one example of an idea. But I think that balance, look, balance is the key to everything in life, not just diet, but especially in your diet. Just putting vegetables first, thinking about what's on the plate, being a little bit mindful about what you're putting into your body. And it starts with planning, going to the grocery store and buying those items and having them available to use, first of all.
Well, and Jake, that's kind of where I was going, I guess, is we're all busy, right? Like we're all Sunday night thinking about next week, and it's like, oh man, we have to not only get our kids to school and get to work, but we have to plan our meals. And it's like, how do you do that in a healthy fashion? And what's simple enough? And obviously you pick the book up here and
Yep.
You figure that out. You follow the recipes here. But I think that's like very baseline. We just want to know, and you described it here, Hope, is vegetables, protein, right? Natural grains,
beans, beans, legumes, really good for you. I think people forget about that.
Yeah.
All kinds of beans, lentils, rice.
Right. And I think like a little headline here is single ingredient, right? Like single ingredient foods that aren't processed, right? That you go to the store and you get, and then you could put together, obviously, to make a meal, but that aren't.
Read labels. Also read the label. If you're thinking about buying something, pick it up and read the label. And sometimes you'll be horrified. Try and get ingredients, try and buy products with the smallest amount of ingredients, as you're saying. It makes a difference. I try to avoid chemicals. I don't buy processed foods. I don't.
One of the things my wife and I we experimented with years ago, we started doing this. We just got smaller plates, and we would serve ourselves.
So smart.
And then we'd serve ourselves and then put the rest away. And it wasn't just because of like the calorie aspect. It was actually just because I didn't feel good if I ate too much, and I had to do something to kind of break that pattern. So smaller plate works great.
Yeah, portion sizes, especially if you're eating out, portion sizes in the USA are ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't even know how. I remember growing up and going to restaurants with my parents and my grandparents and like ordering a steak for dinner and eating the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I did that. Like these days, I go out to eat with, a friend, and we'll always share an entree. I rarely would get an entree and eat it myself because it's just not that healthy. So portion size, definitely. Smaller plates helps. And also taking your time. I think, when we're all busy, we're all rushing, but when you're eating, to be mindful makes such a difference. When I'm busy and I'm hungry and I've waited, and I sometimes I stand in my kitchen like voraciously eating. I eat so much more than when I sit down and I actually chew the food and take my time. So trying to carve out, even if it's just a short period of time, to just sit down and like take a deep breath before you start to eat.
Yeah, I think that's why, I don't know about you, Mike, but I'm fascinated by the whole restaurant industry because it's there's a lot of different reasons why we eat, and obviously we're not going to unpack that on this podcast, but one of the reasons for me is comfort. And
Yeah.
I think the ability to deliver that is amazing. Obviously there's another side to that too. But I just think it's such a wonderful thing to be able to make someone's day with it, to your point about the flavors. When you think about it, really, when you're telling the story about the gentleman, and I'm sorry, I forget the chef's name, that you referenced back in Philly, that where you volunteered in the restaurant, but it was
Oh yeah,
about
Guillermo Pernod.
Guillermo, yeah.
Great guy and a good friend.
Yeah, we can tie this whole thing back to his flavors and creating that sensation for you that was strong enough for you to say, I want to come work for you for free. And I think, like, for everyone listening that owns a business or intends to, how can you make such an impact upon a customer where they would want to come work for you for free because you changed their life? Like, and that was, I just think it's fascinating what the power of food, the power of an amazing dinner, not only the food, but the conversation, the atmosphere, the music, it's amazing.
But look,
it's
you could
transformative.
say the same. You could say the same thing for a kid that likes to read. Maybe he's
Right.
got a local bookstore and he's intrigued and he loves the books, that the book in the window, and he like goes in and says, "Can I like come in and help you rearrange books?" I mean, it really can work for a lot of different segments of the market. It just happens to be that I like food in the restaurant business. But yeah, and that goes back to the point of paying attention, for young people to pay attention to what sparks their interest and makes them want to learn.
That is the theme that ties every one of these interviews together that we've done for the past 2 months, Mike. It's simply that I was intrigued by it, I was fascinated by it, I was inspired by it, and so I did. And not to say it's easy, but it's relatively simple. I'm going to follow this path. Now, of course, there's bumps along the way, but that seems to be the constant piece of package of advice that we're getting here. And Hope, we always like to ask this question of our guests too, and want to give this to you. I know we're running out of time here, so I want to ask this question. If you had the opportunity to create a billboard that the whole world could see, and you had the chance to put whatever you wanted on it, what would you put on it after doing everything you've done and seeing everything you've seen and all the things you're about to do? What would you put on that billboard?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
My father always said, live every day like it's your last, and one day you'll be right. I mean, and that kind of sums it up. I mean, don't be afraid. This wouldn't all fit on the billboard, but don't be afraid. Do the things that you want to do. Seize the moment.
It'll only turn the
For
steak
me,
once.
it's like dive head first into it all and just swim. Yeah. Live life.
Only turn the steak once, right? That's the other piece of it.
Yeah,
Once.
definitely. Make sure that the grill's on high.
I'm fascinated by this. I would love to ask you questions about all the chefs you've interviewed, all the restaurants you've been to, but I guess final personal question here: when you're having when it's one of those days where you just want a quick fast food, what's your guilty pleasure? Where are you headed after all these Michelin restaurants you've eaten at? What's your favorite?
Into my own kitchen, and I'm gonna make a plate of pasta.
Ooh.
If it was my last meal on earth, it would be pasta. It's so easy, and it's always in the cabinet, and you don't have to do a lot to it. And if it's good quality pasta, you can have it on the table in 15 minutes, and you can vary the flavors and whatever you're in the mood for. It's just easy and delicious.
Are you Italian enough to call the sauce gravy?
That's it. That's an American thing. They don't call sauce gravy in Italy. Only in South Philadelphia do they do that. Gravy in Italy is something brown that you have on meat, but they don't even use that word.
I should say, okay, then I stand corrected. Are you Philadelphia enough to call the sauce?
Yeah, I mean, I am. I'm from Philly, like born and raised. I've been here my whole life. I never moved away until I went to Rome 4 years ago. So I've lived here my whole life. But yeah, I don't call it gravy. Sorry, but except when I'm in South Philly at Villa de Roma.
So Jake, and Hope, excuse me for talking about this in front of you, but we obviously deserve, or our audience deserves, a deeper dive into food and how to eat healthy. And Hope is a perfect, obviously, guest to join us for that. So Hope, I think we need to bring you back specifically for that. Now that we've gotten a lot of the other stuff out of the way and the entrepreneurship aspect of this, you have been a very gracious guest. So thank you so much for joining us on your Sunday night. We're now at almost 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Is there
It's a pleasure.
Is there anything you would like to add before we get on and start our week tomorrow?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me. And yeah, it's always fun to chat about food and living a healthy lifestyle. I think that especially on Sunday nights, you know, it's something that's great to think about going into the new week, because it's never too late to start living a healthy lifestyle if that's what you're into. And, you know, having a great diet doesn't mean suffering. I mean, the beauty is that, you know, having a healthy diet is easy and delicious. And so if we're talking about nourishing our bodies and our souls, food is a great place to start.
Thank you, Hope. It was amazing. Connect with
You're
Hope
welcome.
if you want to pick up a copy of Hope's book. Obviously, you can head to Amazon, but you can also just connect with her on Instagram at I Crave Philly, and she'll even work with you on customizing it. So
yeah,
sure to reach
it's
out
a great gift. And if people want me to sign the book, I'm happy to do it. Just reach out to me on Instagram and I can help facilitate that, or go to Amazon.com.
Perfect.
So it's at I Crave Philly on Instagram.
Yep.
Correct.
Excellent.
All right.
All right.
Perfect.
Thank you, Hope.
Thank you, Hope. Have a great evening, everybody. Go get them.
Thanks for having me.
Travel safely, Hope.
Have
We'll
a
talk
great
to you
night,
soon.
guys.
Take care.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.